Well, thank you, guys. So thanks for coming back to our afternoon of copyright and AI. And we're going to kick off this afternoon with a panel on music, which is going to be led by our general counsel, Reagan Smith. And so, Reagan, please take it away.
Thank you. Thanks for coming here. Is everyone in? All right. So I'm really excited for this panel, which is about application of artificial intelligence for music creation. And I'm going to start by introducing the panelists. And we're going to have this in more of a discussion format, I think, than some of the other panels, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. So starting on the end furthest from me is Alex Mitchell. He's the founder and CEO of Boomy, which is a company using AI to create instant music products. And you previously founded Audio Kite Research, a leading market research platform for independent music, and has served as a consultant and advisor for companies including Shady Rewards and Krantz Media Groups. Next to Alex is David Hughes, the Chief Technology Officer at the Recording Industry Association of America. His responsibilities at the RIAA include developing and promoting technical standards, outreach to the broader technical communities, and representing the industry's interests on technology issues. Before that, he was a Vice President of Technology Strategies and Digital Policy at Sony Music. Next to David is E. Michael Harrington, who is a musician and musicologist who has served as an expert witness in hundreds of music copyright cases, including those involving music by Pharrell Williams, Led Zeppelin, and Taylor Swift, and the civil rights anthem We Shall Overcome. Dr. Harrington is also on the board of the Future of Music Coalition and has taught as a professor for institutions, including the Berklee College of Music. And then next to me is Joel Douek. Joel is an award-winning composer who has scored over 80 documentaries, including those by Sir David Attenborough, hundreds of TV episodes, blockbuster animes, and feature films. He is the co-founder of EccoVR, a company that creates music and sound design for virtual reality experiences, and is also on the board of the Society of Composers and Lyricists. So thank you all for coming here. And I am really looking forward to this panel also because it is the only one where none of the panelists are attorneys.
Beliefs.
Oh no, Joel said he got a law degree during lunchtime, but I don't think he's passed the bar. So I'm looking forward to getting into some real takes, and no one here is giving anyone legal advice. So before we dive in, at least that anyone should rely on. All right. So for better or for worse, the music ecosystem has often been at the forefront of technological changes, and depending upon your perspective, that either positions music creators and their business concerns at the vanguard of progress, as the canary in the digital coal mine, or as both. And AI technologies are going to bring even more change to the process of music creation, discovery, and consumption. And I think to start, David, why don't you lay out kind of a landscape view of some of the roles that you see AI technologies might be expected to play in the music industry now and in the upcoming years.
Okay, thank you, Ann. So it's a pleasure to be here today and to talk about something that's not blockchain. I'm very excited. You have no idea. So I guess I like to start by saying, and a lot of people have said this, that this AI and computer-generated music is nothing new. I have recollections of an album made by David Cope, who was a professor at UC Santa Cruz, and he had an album called Classical Music Composed by Computers. Now, that was in 1997, and it was a minor hit released by Centaur Records, but it was very interesting at the time. And what he did was he was suffering from writer's block. And he was a computer guy and a composer. And so he said, well, what if I just write an algorithm and feed a whole bunch of stuff in here? And one of the things he did was he just took all of Beethoven's sonatas, fed them into a computer, pumped them out, listened to endless variations, I'm assuming, that the computer made, picked one, recorded it, put it on an album. Interestingly enough, if you look at the credits under composer, it actually says computer-generated composition. That's how he credited the composer, not himself, which I thought was kind of gimmicky at the time, but may have copyright implications in the future. No, I didn't say that because I'm not a lawyer. But the reality is it goes way back. Computer-generated music goes back to the 50s. So 1951, Alan Turing, in an effort to try to have a computer do something that he thought only humans could do, turned his computers, and you may remember Alan Turing from breaking the Enigma code or being in a movie with Keira Knightley, yeah. He's also going to be on the new 50-pound note in the UK. Did you know that? That's big news. Anyway, in 1951, he created some music on his computer, so it goes way back. But now what we're seeing is really AI, and how we define AI is a different part of our conversation maybe, but computer-generated machine learning and AI, I'm going to bundle them all together, impacting every aspect of the music industry, pretty much every aspect. So I'm just going to go through a list quickly to give people some ideas, because recently I was talking to an executive, not a major label executive, but a music industry executive who said pretty soon there's going to be music on Spotify composed by AI. And I said, what year is it? There are tens and tens of thousands of production music, relaxation music, study music, yoga music already on all the streaming services. So this is a reality. This isn't something that's going to happen. But let's take a step back. Some of the ways AI can contribute to this whole process is we have seen AI, I'm going to call them systems or tools, whatever you want to call them, that create ideas for lyrics. I call them lyric kernels. So it gives you an idea to write your lyrics. There's another one that does the same thing for melodies. It starts giving you some melodies to work on. So then you have, if you had writer's block, you have somewhere to start. And then we see another company hypothetically creating, generating beats. And Alex will talk more about his company. And Sony Computer Science Laboratories had a number of initiatives. One was the composition of the song Daddy's Car, which was trained on all the Beatles catalog and pumped out a song that sounds pretty much like if my junior high school band had tried to write a song that sounded like the Beatles. It's pretty awful, but it's identifiable as a Beatles song-ish. And then we see more sophisticated companies like Endel and others doing personalized audio tracks to boost mood or to be used for specific circumstances and so on. But it keeps going. It's not just this sort of idea of kernels and beats. We've got companies and AI software out there that are doing real compositions. So if you go on Spotify and you look for AI playlists, one of the top songs is Lovesick by Taryn Southern. And she trained her AI to write composition based on 19th century public domain pieces, and then picked one, wrote the lyrics to it, went in the studio, recorded it, and now hundreds of thousands of people, which sounds like a lot, except on Spotify, unless you're in the billions, it's really not. But are streaming this track, okay? And it goes even further, though, because now you can get an AI that starts writing lyrics, and then you do text-to-speech technology. Then you layer MIDI technology on top of the text-to-speech, so now it's singing according to the melody that the AI has written, and it can create everything from scratch to finish for a sound recording. Might not be good, but the AI is there, and it's happening already. And then I want to quickly talk about how it impacts everything else in the music industry. So we talk about generating music to match a certain issue. So you feed a video in there, and it'll match the mood and compose something in real time to create background music for your video. Or if you needed to engineer, there are AI that will help you mix. There's AI that'll help you master. If you want to have your song remastered, you can go to a remastering engineer and pay thousands of dollars, or you can use one of these AI tools to remaster it for much less. These are available now. And my personal concern is that some of my close friends are audio engineers, and I'm not sure how this is going to impact their livelihoods, but hopefully they're old enough that they'll retire before they're all out of jobs. Then we see other technologies doing some interesting things like recording decomposition. So this is where you take an old recording, maybe a stereo composition that was just recorded in a couple of tracks, goes in there, separates all the tracks out into what we would call recording stems, and it pulls out the drums and the bass and the vocals and everything. You strip out the vocals, now you have a karaoke track, and that's, may or may not, if it was licensed correctly, that's a great idea. And could create all the stems from something that never even had stems. It was recorded live with maybe just a stereo microphone. Then the next level is now we have a sound recording. We've got AI that are analyzing, predicting marketplaces for those human-created songs. There's a company working on AI that helps A&R people match songs to singers. There's everything. It's like blockchain 4 years ago for AI. If you can think of an idea, there's a company out there doing it. There are AI that are generating these generic and thematic and personalized music lists. So you, based on your interests and the other music that you like, it'll create a list that's personalized for you. We see, for example, in the news just a week or two ago, iHeartRadio laid off 850 people. And when asked why, they basically said, because now we have AI to create all our playlists. We don't need all those people. And so it is impacting the music industry severely already. And it goes beyond making the sound recording or even marketing the sound recording in that sense. Recommending concert locations, venues, days of week, who should open for the act, set lists in concerts, all of these things. People are starting to dabble with AI to do all of these things. Anything to increase the ticket sales across the board. There's another company called Museo that listens to the sound recordings and automatically creates metadata. It pulls out all the, what we call objective metadata, that's beats per minute, key signature, the language that's being sung in, the absolute pitch for classical music, as you may know, if it's an A, if it's 440 or not 440, it's technical, but okay. And subjective measures like the genre and the tempo and the mood, is it happy, is it sad, and all that stuff. And there's AI doing that now. And then identifying the tracks and artists and the metadata, putting it all together, figuring out the metrics, trying to figure out how to maximize royalties. You name it, AI is impacting the whole chain from beginning to end. And I've said my piece.
All right, well, let me follow up a little bit on your piece. So if you're comparing AI to the blockchain of 4 years ago, I'm not.
That's only because we had a lot of panels about blockchain, which were mostly not productive.
Okay.
And they haven't stopped.
Well, we're going to have a productive panel.
Oh, no, this is great. This is awesome. This is exciting.
Right. Well, so an earlier panel mentioned that TikTok has acquired Douek. I mean, they're large companies acquiring AI technology companies, and you just mentioned using machine learning for ID tracking at a time when we're seeing consolidation of collective management organizations globally. We see the U.S. effort with the Music Modernization Act to build this database that's going to match sound recordings to their underlying musical works. Are you seeing AI incorporated into viable businesses in which for royalty processing? And then we'll move to creation issues. I think
In
my
the
question.
context of the MLC, I actually haven't seen anything, but that doesn't mean it's not there.
Right.
Certainly a combination of fingerprinting technology plus the database, plus training some systems on how to match. It'll happen if it's not happening already.
And then focusing on music creation, Alex, can you speak a little bit from the technical
Sure.
side for what Boomy is doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I would start by just saying, today there's been a lot of discussions of AI. There's been discussions of GP2. And, I want to stress that there isn't one sort of one-size-fits-all way to produce original works and recordings. Certainly our users are advanced as saying, I want to make a hip-hop beat that has cello at this BPM with these qualities, but it can also be as simple as pressing a button. And to, sort of put some numbers on it, our users have created in the last 6 months about 350,000 original works and recordings because it takes 5 seconds to create something original. If we're looking at AI through this lens where there's only way to do it is to train data, then I think it's very problematic. But that's not the way this stuff works. Algorithms are the past, present, and future of music. I really believe that. I think that's kind of what you're hinting at there. If everybody in this room isn't aware, I'm not a lawyer. That's clear. I do have friends who are lawyers, and I asked them, can we pull, a statutory definition of artificial intelligence from anywhere? and they sent me the National Defense Authorization Act, which is probably the most recent definition. Of course, it only applies to that bill, right? Fine. Not a lawyer. But that second definition in there was broad enough, and I can read it, but it was broad enough where it isn't a stretch to say that the way it was defining artificial intelligence would apply to Jimi Hendrix or Brian Eno or any one of the musicians who we traditionally consider, to be creating music using algorithms. Guitar pedals are algorithms, right? So when we produce music, we're using a variety of different algorithms, not that different from sort of chaining together, different types of methodologies. And we are working on lyrics, we are working on vocals, and we're using a variety of approaches to do that. So it's still a fundamentally creative process to build what we refer to as music automation systems that can do a lot of different things.
So can you, is there more you can share about how Boomy does use artificial intelligence to create songs? 'Cause it's not a guitar pedal company, right? Your tag is save the songs you like, reject songs you don't, and teach Boomy to make songs you love.
Sure.
And so if it's not doing this through just using algorithms with inputs, what it makes Boomy stand out?
Sure. I mean, without giving up some of the really interesting things we're doing, kind of in the background there, I can give you one example where, so we have focused, there's been a lot of research on how to generate compositions from feeding past compositions. And generally speaking, this produces MIDI data, which on its own sounds pretty bad because you need instruments and you need software instruments or real instruments to actually play those notes. So we have taken an approach where we're looking as much at the production side of things, right? So we have systems, for example, that can create large volumes of sounds or different sounds for different purposes, and then look at all of those sounds and decide, well, these are the sounds that are grouped together. It's harder than you think, because you could have a random, loud, silly guitar sound. You could also have a soft, interesting bass sound. Those things might not go together, right? And so we're doing, again, that's just one of many examples of an algorithm that we've created that can create sounds, that can understand those sounds, how those sounds might work together. Those use traditional training processes. Those are trained on samples that we've purchased the rights to, also samples that we've created. And by analyzing them, we can, part of our IP and part of why our music sounds so much better than some of the past attempts at this stuff is because we're looking at that production. So that's one example of something where copyright and it isn't really about the composition, it isn't really about feeding it data that's been copyrighted. It's just an algorithmic approach to solving a specific problem. Again, which I feel like even though we're taking it to this interesting, extreme, maybe historically, it isn't fundamentally different from the way musicians and artists have thought about creating music up until this point.
I think that's a good time to switch to the composer, right? How do you think about creating music, and how do algorithms or set of rules apply into your practices, and how do you see AI being useful or not to your craft?
I think the first important point I want to make is that it's not black and white. It's a spectrum from, on the one hand, the beginnings of little tools that assist various parts of the process of composition, all the way to what we might imagine as, full-on composition without any involvement of the composer at all. And I think right now we're kind of in this area here, and so there is technology that we're already bringing into our daily work habits as composers through a range of different things. But fundamentally, what we want as a composer or a songwriter is to try to deal with some of the more chore-like tasks of composing. And AIs can actually help quite a lot with that kind of stuff. We want to be able to liberate ourselves, accelerate those processes, and liberate ourselves to really focus on the creative side of things. And that can involve both structural things, and I personally don't use AI in its kind of rule-based algorithmic way to help me write music, but I use other aspects of it. So, for example, in mixing and mastering, there's very clever AI machine learning tools that can help kind of analyze a mix and improve it for you, almost immediately. So I look at it as, at this point, we're helping us solve some of the chores. But that's going to change. It's going to change over time. And I think the line is going to get a little bit thinner, and I think it's exciting. I'm definitely not one of those composers who feels that, unlike the art critic comment that was written before, that this is, a horrible travesty in the world of art. On the contrary, I think it's very interesting. We were talking about it earlier. I think it's going to kind of generate its own influence on the future, qualitatively, of music. One aspect that I think in terms of music production that keeps coming up for me is that composing is really the same thing as improvising. That's really what we're doing. You just sit there and you, at the piano or the guitar, you noodle around, until you find something. And what's interesting about that process, and where that might also feed back on the way artificial intelligence is done, is that if anything, it's not about a rule-based algorithmic way that our brains are working. Quite the contrary. It's about relinquishing a good deal of conscious control and letting these things happen without the self-criticism, the self-editing. So there's some ethical implications there. I guess what I'm saying is that if you really want an AI to write good music, you've got to free it completely of all boundaries. So we'll see where that goes, but there is interesting work being done in that area of rethinking how AI is actually trying to write music, trying to improvise. And by giving it a different kind of attitude, if you want, where it works in a much more probabilistic way, it might actually bear more fruit. So yeah, the short answer is I think it's early days for us as composers. It's working its way in, definitely as tools. It's super useful. It'll continue to be. And I think as long as we keep that dialogue open between the developers of these tools and the composers so that we maximize how it can serve us, how it can help us to write music. This area here at the extreme is one I think we're going to get into in the rest of the discussion. So I'll kind of let anyone else chime in there.
Okay, so Dr. Harrington, maybe you can speak a little bit from your perspective as a musician, as a musicologist. I think, particularly for Western music and popular music, what many regard as pleasing is based on certain conventions of composition that's evolved over centuries that may be, somewhat predictable algorithms. Does that make music especially favorable for machine learning? How does this change the type of music that we can expect to see created?
I think that's a great question. I also think, going back to something Joel just said, that one thing AI can do, and computers in the old days calculators could do, is even free up some of the chores. And like if you write a book, if you're reading a 300-page book by Stephen King, and I say, oh, wow, how did you love page 87? Well, yeah, what do you say favorite sentences and favorite clauses? You don't think that way. And so in a book, there are a lot of things that have to move to get to the important points, the important characters. And it's often the same with music. Not every note in Taylor Swift's last song matter. These parts do. And to go back to what's pleasing, everything, I can sound really cruel and objective and heartless on this, and so what? Everything's math-based. If you write with 3 chords, your rules are don't use a whole lot of other chords. If your range is like AI, we mentioned about artists and repertoire. If you want to find music that works for Hootie and the Blowfish, he likes to sing in a certain range. And some other people want to sing in a different range. So AI can be used in all this, but there's math underlying everything, whether it's the 3 chords, whether it's a cerebral jazz. And a lot of times this is just helping us create it more easily. One thing that interested me a lot was when I was growing up and learning how to play classical music after I had my Beatles phase, which never ended, by the way, but of course. Bach has this Prelude number 1, C major, every beginning pianist plays it. It's these nice chords. They're 3 notes or 4 pitch classes, 3 or 4. And it occurred to me, this is perfect. And I thought, well, how come Bach didn't use the others? Because he's good. And then it occurred to me as a challenge, okay, use the others. So what I did, I found out later in terms of copyright, that's quite the derivative work. My work is completely derived from him. It's the negative in terms of a photograph. And what could you do with that? And I like to apply it, well, I'm also interested in all the math of this, how we got to these points, what sounds good. I used to study, I remember I found out Mozart was great one day. I always thought, like, you're pulling one over on me. Mozart's awful. I mean, I love Bach and Beethoven and all that. I thought Mozart was predictable. So I wanted to set up the theorem and all that, and how could I prove my point? And I would go to the library and open up Vivaldi and Beethoven, Scarlatti. I'd look at the score I hadn't seen. I'd cover it and say, can I write what's coming? And I was really good at it. Telemann was simple. Scarlatti's easy. I got to Mozart. I tried one of them. I'm wrong this time. So I kept doing this all after, well, not all afternoon. After about 30 minutes, I realized Mozart does the most clever, mathematically complex things in weird places. This is simple, this is simple, this is simple. Holy God, what's that doing? It's like it makes no sense, you can't predict it. And that's what interests me a lot in melody, harmony, rhythm, lyrics. When you get to some strange, why do these words go in? And what's the math behind it all? And to me, AI it's computer music. The stuff you mentioned, David Cope, and you mentioned Turing. I studied with Yannis Anakis, and we would look at all the math involved in something, and not only just melody, but density class, timbre class, and all these other things. And I find all this does come together, and AI can just enhance it and make it easier for all of us to create. And if you want to do easy underscore, you don't want to pay someone, yeah, it's going to take away jobs and playlist, which once playlist came about, I thought, like, who's going to tell me what to listen to? I'm appalled at that, but.
Can I?
Sure, yes.
Yeah, so stylistically, I mean, we always love to beat up on yoga music, but but I guess I think we on the panel we could all agree that certain kinds of music are maybe easier for an AI to attempt and to succeed at, and so I think music that doesn't get judged for being formulaic, but in fact it's one of its features. I think that that can be a good thing. I'm not sure whether jazz is then, by definition, the nirvana of what an AI could hope to achieve, just in terms of its flexibility and inventiveness and improvisational quality. Just putting it out there.
Yeah. So in terms of genre and how formulaic is, I have to agree. So I think that country music is going to be the biggest sort of paradox for AI, because the underlying melodies and so on are very formulaic, but the lyrics are based on human experience. I'd be very interested how long it would take an AI to come up with this song, the Tammy Wynette song, Divorce. Unless that AI spent time in a kitchen fighting with their spouse in front of their 4-year-old AI, they probably wouldn't come up with it. I'm just gonna guess. So, but going back to what Michael said about math, I think a lot of this composition is formulaic, and we think that that's so bad. But I always remember this interview that I saw with Chuck Berry, where they asked him, how did you write all these hits? And he said, well, of course he used the 3 chords. He knew it had to be 3 minutes. He knew the hook had to come in 45 seconds in, all the standard stuff. But they said, well, what about the topics? He says, I used to sit in the soda jerk shop and listen to the kids talk. And he said, kids only talk about 4 things: school, cars, music, and falling in love. That's it. He said, why waste time writing about anything else? The kids don't give a shit. So that's what he did. It was very formulaic. He used his algorithms. And then he layered on top of that the unpredictability. So the songwriter Desmond Childs, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's a pretty famous guy and one of my friends, best friends. He wrote songs like You Give Love a Bad Name. And he just did an interview not long ago for Bob Lefsetz, and he said when he was learning to write songs, the best lesson he ever learned was every line should have a contradiction. You give love a bad name. He goes, that's a hit song. Now we have to write it. And I don't know if that can be trained. Maybe you can have an AI to spit out hit song titles, and then you have to actually do all the hard work.
If I could say something about the unpredictability too, in what you said about Chuck Berry, AI does miss the big picture. And I'll give an example. Why would Garth Brooks, hey, I'm living in Nashville, I should mention Garth, right? Why would he use an Egyptian drum in a hit song? And he did. He used a Douek. The AI couldn't have come up with that. Or how about Jimi Hendrix writing a lovely Viennese waltz? And by that, you're thinking, do I know a Viennese waltz? Yeah, manic depression. Manic depression. Da, 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 da. You know, it's beautiful. It's lilting. You dance a certain way to it. Why would his drummer use brushes on the opening song on the second album? And you could go on and on with these moments that AI can't do that because it's against what it learned. Back to, I think it's learning from us and improving on us sometimes.
What do you think, Alex?
Sure. So what's not hard to do, what's not that hard to do anymore, is create sort of a best guess copy of a style that came before. I remember seeing some research some years ago before Boomy about an AI system that was trained to create folk music. Do you remember this? I can't exactly remember who it was, but it was trained on American folk songs and it could faithfully reproduce American folk songs. As somebody who studied fiddle and used to play American folk songs, in the back of my head I was like, why? Right? No, seriously, it's a serious question. There's people that make American folk songs like all the time and they're amazing at it. So I think the utility question, right, of why is there really so few people who can make American folk that we need to automate this? And what we're hitting on and what you're talking about is the real challenge, which is that it's very hard to do something new. It's hard to allow an automated system to make those kinds of mistakes and to screw up in such a way that it is still creative, right? So this balance between creativity, which necessarily means making mistakes, and accuracy, which means I'm kind of just doing something that the people can do already, I think is crucial for the crop of AI music companies, us included, to think about. Because it comes down to, this is a nascent market. There's a lot of different approaches being tried. And I question sort of some of the utility of just making a best guess copy of a jazz song or an American folk song, because there's plenty of people who do that already, right?
And you end up with the lowest common denominator.
Sure.
Yeah, so I mean, when we start to get copyright in this, I think we heard earlier, copyright protects, the bad art along with the good, but the whole, goal is to encourage the production of more of the good. In the case of AI technology, does it matter, is it more likely that certain genres are more ripe for wholesale substitution versus what you started saying of taking a kernel or a building off a piece, a component of a song? It might be in the case of country, 3 chords can be predicted, but we're not quite sure if AI can find out the truth. But in the case of hip hop, that seems more layered and perhaps more difficult for an AI created song to be fully pleasing without human editing, interference, and contributions.
I mean, I personally think it's just a matter of time, and utility or not, I think it's going to get done. We're going to do it because that's what science does, if you like, and this is really under the umbrella of science. Why do we do it? Because we can, and we need to find out. So it's going to happen, and then we'll have to kind of retroactively look back on it and say, was this meaningful or was it not? So I think all those styles of music are eventually going to come. I think, drilling in a little bit more to the question of what makes music human, we've talked about this a little bit, is, one of the ones that I came up with is imperfection. A lot of the time when we record a live instrument, it's not to introduce what you'd expect, which is the level of virtuosity. I mean, that's a given. Hopefully they play in tune and everything. But what it is, it's the nuance and it's the mistakes. And it's that imperfection that comes into it. And somehow for us, that translates into maybe a sense of heart and soul. I don't know. What makes music human, it's hard to, get past that area without getting into the metaphysical, but I can tell you that on a daily basis as composers, when, for example, we're dealing with a small budget and you need to get a big orchestral sound, we will habitually record just a few instruments live and then layer it on top of sampled instruments. And with the sampled instruments, we'll use our AI effectively to humanize. I know the irony is not lost on me, but we use the computer to humanize the playing performance style so that it kind of matches and blends all, as something that is, something that feels human. So what makes music human? I don't know. It's an open question, and it's definitely going to end up as a metaphysical question, because we'd like to believe that there is something kind of above and beyond, something intangible that we as composers bring to the table. Is that true? Is that not? I think we're going to find out all of this. I'm not going to proclaim anything. I think we're going to find out all of this in some giant singularity moment.
Can't wait.
He was staring at me when he said, "What does it make? What is it? what is? What music isn't human? I think is another angle to look at that through, right? Somebody earlier,
According to Queen synthesizers.
Well, sure, right. I actually think that's a great point. I mean, Queen used to tag all of their albums with no synths, and there was a conversation about synthesizers and how it was going to affect instrumentalists. A more recent example would be autotune, right? I mean, there was a lot of sort of protests against autotune, and now find me something in Billboard that doesn't use autotune or Melodyne. I think this is something that is, when we look at these automation technologies, particularly as it pertains to the production side and the composition side, where now I have something. If I'm reacting to it, I remember the first time I was moved, right, by something that an algorithm we created, wrote. It was crazy. It was this absolutely sounds. It had sort of the imperfection you're talking about. We had modeled that. It was a piano in a room, sort of had a tape hiss, and it was this is. I mean, we're way past. That's obviously robotic or that's obviously a computer. I think ultimately the arbiter is going to be the market. Ultimately, it's going to come up to, do people want to listen to it? Do they want to use it? Where are they using it? And I think that's what's interesting. But I don't know that I've ever heard a piece of music that I would not consider human. I have a personal belief that there's no such thing as AI-generated music. There's people at every step of the way when you create these systems. Algorithms don't spontaneously just happen. I believe there's intention and there's there's musicality still necessary to create an automated system that produces something that frankly is worth listening to at all.
But break that down a little bit, because I think earlier we heard about some of the Copyright Office's practices in registering and requiring some human active creation. And, going back to, there's a Sarni case, I know I'm talking to NetLayers about taking a photograph. If you are a developer of a system of algorithms that doesn't know what the work is going to be, is that the same as creating the output of the work overall? I mean, is that what you're saying?
It's not a lawyer.
Yeah.
Personally, that's what I believe. I think it's hard to draw a line, right? It's hard to draw a line between somebody who I use the guitar pedal example just because it's an example, a common example of pre-computer use of algorithms in creating music. It's strange to me to say that, well, this pedal, right, that's okay, but this other pedal, if you use some type of algorithm or some training process, then we're going to kind of treat that differently. And certainly people who design those systems, right, they're not going to do it in a vacuum. They're going to do it because they have something to express. We work not only with our internal development resources, but we're also sort of looking out at the world and seeing researchers and composers, people who have unique ways of creating music with algorithms, many of which don't actually use any of the systems we've talked about today. And which are creating things that are fundamentally new. They sound different. I can't really put a genre on some of these algorithmic works. I don't understand why you wouldn't look at those people as artists. It's this kind of new type of artist that is maybe a little more common than we think it is, of people who are adding their own theories, their technical backgrounds into creating these things. And I would say if somebody never learns anything about music theory, but uses code and creates a program that creates beautiful music, I don't understand why we would call that person anything other than a musician.
I was just going to say that, I mean,
that's an opinion.
What keeps coming up for me is the idea of autonomy, because a guitar pedal, it's still very much doing the bidding of the musician. And I think where we're getting to this part of the spectrum is where things start to become autonomous, and that's where the fears lie, at many different levels. And I think that's kind of a different question, really, at that point.
I was just going to say about, I agree that AI is human. I mean, it came from human. There's no such thing as non-human music. And I'd use the example of George Gershwin, who went through periods of studying with Joseph Schillinger, who was doing math and music and plotting parametric equations to come up with melodies. Summertime was supposedly involved in that way. And I can show you a lot of beautiful melodies that are, oh, it's kind of like that curve, and it's this curve. And so what? I mean, if it's an image, just like if you saw mountains coming and going, you could plot the melody. That's been done for centuries. And what's different about a parametric equation doing that? That's human.
Well, I want to ask you a follow-up question as to the role that AI is going to have in what we're seeing in music, which has been, whether actual or not, I would say definitely a perceived uptick in infringement cases in the last couple of years, which I know you have been involved in many of these cases. So there's been recent headlines involving Katy Perry, Taylor Swift, Drake, Migos, Stairway to Heaven, and this followed, the Ninth Circuit's blurred line decisions, where Judge Nguyen, in the dissent, criticized the decision as allowing the gays to accomplish what no one has ever before, copyright a musical style. So what is the increased use or discussion on AI to create wholesale or assist in the creation of music? What is that going to do to the landscape in these cases for infringement, do you think?
Well, I have a huge dark cloud over my head on this because I got dragged into the Blurred Lines appeal. The 212 musicians used my stuff in several places, and suddenly I'm getting all these congratulations for being involved, and didn't know I was. And then Ken Freundlich said, you want to co-author a brief, and so got involved in the Led Zeppelin appeal, the Katy Perry appeal. What I hated about, especially the Blurred Lines, it was the first time in history no one copied a melody. No melody was copied. Sing it, right? No. No lyrics, no chord changes, no rhythmic features, no sampling. It's the "it reminds me of" standard, which is awful. And this is the part that leads me to thinking about AI. If you say, like Sony did when they had this Daddy's Car song you mentioned earlier, it's built on 45 songs fed into a computer, and out came some Beatle-like stuff. And I can see I reverse engineered it as I think I can, as best I could. And I found that a lot of it is not really, a lot of it's human. But the fact that you said it was Sony doing Beatles, and the reason was because they own the catalog. They're not going to sue themselves. However, this is a big problem if you say who your influences were, because Pharrell and Robin said, oh, yeah, Marvin Gaye, and especially that song. So you're influenced by that song. That now means you're ripe for lawsuits. Publishers find this stuff out, who your influence is, especially if you say, or you want to get under the hood and say what was programmed, or what did AI learn. If it learned George Clinton, then Bridgeport's going to start suing, which they like to sue even as much as the gays like to sue. So I think there are some problems with that in the fact that it shows influence, awareness, maybe the use of, when it should be. Paul McCartney said one time the Beatles are the biggest plagiarists there are. He said we copy from everyone. We're knickers extraordinaire, that British saying, whatever that means. So to me, I'm worried about that, and I can already see where Daddy's Car could be sued. I do a lecture on this, so I've got all the examples. I can do the defense, too. And here's what I'm looking forward to. When does AI start to sue? And I'll give you one reason. Go check Daddy's Car, on YouTube, and then check the cover of it. There's a woman covering it, and she's not doing it that well. Have you heard it? Oh, my God. It's hysterical. And she's earnest. It's nice. She means it, But there's a section of the copyright law that says you shall not change the basic melody or fundamental character. And that's sort of like us doing European moral rights. But if you don't like the version, then AI is going to sue for that, or AI is going to create something, you guys, and then I don't know.
I think to get to where you're trying to go, you need to, recognize a copyright in AI. And I think what part of what we're circling around is whether a lot of these compositions or productions are created by an AI or whether they're created by a person using AI technology, either at whatever point in the process, or maybe it affects authorship. Or if you do get to the point where it's an entirely work created without human involvement, whether copyright should attach. So I think that is a good time to discuss Boomy's approach to ownership of the music, because Boomy asserts a copyright in each of the works, right? And then your model is you would sell it for $5 to $20
Yeah,
to
for professionals who need those rights or need that ownership, sure.
Okay. And then who is listed as the author of the works?
Yeah, so we're sort of pertaining to just the best practices of now, which is that it's basically the developers and sort of the team that is assigned the songwriting credit, so to speak. But in the case of professionals who want to integrate, for example, works that they create with Boomy, in their they need specific licenses, they need sync licenses. We're happy to sell that composition and that recording to people. We do it for $20, actually as low as $5, and we feel that's fair. And if they don't want to purchase it, there's still a lot they can do with it. But we just sort of continue to again assert that ownership and assert that copyright, and we're sort of covering that under the contract that our users agree to when they use the free application that we produce.
So a user agrees to the terms, which is that whatever they say, I want a song sort of like the Beatles, but mixed up with something else.
Can't
or
exactly
what,
do that.
Okay, can't exactly do that. That's not what
that's a
Boomy
little,
does, guys.
I guess yeah.
Okay, whatever. Give me an example of what I could tell Boomy then. I don't
Sure.
want
So
to get you in trouble.
you could say, give me a rap beat at 90 BPM that's got cello and synth.
All right, and then can I say I don't like that? Make it faster.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, I want
And
to
you can go in
it.
and you can manipulate it and you can change it. You can also edit it. You can delete sections. You can rearrange sections. So when it comes to some of this infringement, right, which is a really interesting question when it comes to the way the music is being produced. I'll give a lawyer answer, which is that it depends. It depends. If somebody takes something that Boomy creates and they turn it into a song that they've heard, and they download it and produce it, then there's probably situations under which you can consider it infringement. But I think it really, again, it just depends on that person and their use of the technology. The notion that we would create something that's infringing sort of just from the ether, it's unlikely. It's mathematically very unlikely. In which case we'll pertain to DMCA and all the relevant sort of takedown requests that.
That's a separate issue, right? Sure. I think that I'm beginning.
But what we're getting to is that we're doing our best to sort
panel.
of to pertain to best practices in some of this gray.
But I want to drill down into that because I think what you've described and coupling that with what Dr. Harrington has described is a system where it seems like it's really the terms that you have with your user that are in part perhaps driving the authorship to vest in Boomy, right?
Yes.
We're not really probing whether it has to be. It is because there is an agreement that is going to be that way.
Right.
You're describing a situation where there does seem to be a human directing towards a predictable outcome, which may not be the whole universe of AI music, but is what you're saying. I think that when you're saying best practices, who's determining the best practices? Are you looking at other competitors in the marketplace, or what? Yeah.
Yeah. Again, there are attorneys that we pay money to write these contracts for us,
Right.
and some of these attorneys they represent multiple AI music clients. You might be friends with some of these people, and there's starting to be kind of, again, in lieu of sort of guidance or exact law on where specific instances might lie within this gray, contracts and sort of contract law is what we're gonna rely on, and we're gonna do basically what the attorneys tell us is the best way to do it.
That is always
we don't really have another
strategy.
choice, right? That's pretty much all we can do. But I will say that there are aspects of copyright law, and there are aspects of this that make it kind of difficult to create systems that we might want to do. For example, if we wanted to grant songwriting ownership to every single user for every single song, if that was something we wanted to do, it would be. I said that to our attorney, and he just laughed. He's like, the amount of liability you'd be opening yourself up to.
Because of
all the
infringement
issues.
concerns, or?
Infringement concerns, or just the pure management of the data and managing all of these different publishing contracts. it can get messy
Wow.
because nobody's ever really done it sort of this fast or this frequent before. And so it's not as if I'm blaming the law, but we have to work within the framework that we that we have.
Yes. Okay, so I want to switch to David for a second, though. And can you, from the recorded music perspective, talk about how labels might be thinking about ownership in the AI context? I know Warner Music just took a stake or signed a deal with a company called Endel, which has a practice of listing software engineers as music authors. How do you see do you agree with Alex's characterization of best practices, or what other things should we be thinking about how the music community is looking at these issues of ownership?
I think right now, the major labels in particular are following it very closely. That's it. First, I'm not a lawyer. Second of all, I'm not going to speak for them. And third of all, I think there's a lot of balls in the air.
A lot of interest. Joel?
Again, coming out as a composer and also as a board member of the Society of Composers Lyricists, which is about as close as we've got to a union, I guess my salient hope is that we can find ways during all these changes that protects the ability of composers and songwriters to generate revenue. I think there's often a mistake because we make comparisons of like, oh, let's ingest the Beatles and Beyonce, and somewhere in that narrative, we're looking at the incredibly powerfully wealthy. And what gets discarded is that the vast majority of composers and songwriters are not in that bucket and just need to feed their families, pay their mortgages, and that will go away. And so the question kind of that makes me want to ask is, does anybody care if real music written by real humans goes away or not? Because if they don't really care and everyone is satisfied with whatever an AI might ultimately quite brilliantly create in the future, then it's a different discussion. But I think where we are now is if we're talking about, let's say, the ethical use of AI, the idea of protecting artists, composers, songwriters, as this moves forward and as we try to shape these laws, it has to be mindful of that. It really does.
Well, you know what? I'll jump in there, and I see maybe Alex wants to say something, because you know what? Like, I care, right? I mean, I bought a fair trade coffee this morning. Are we going to enter a world where we see an attribution on a playlist whether music is human created, primarily human created? Is that going to be a trend that we're going to start to think about in our music consumption? And how does that, I know we've got no lawyers on the panel, but I think it does relate to some of the attribution and moral rights issues that were raised on earlier panels, just in terms of giving credit where credit is due and recognizing what is underlying the creation of a song or a recording that we're listening to.
Yeah, but at the same time, I know firsthand that a large popular streaming platform is actively using AI music because it owns it and therefore doesn't have to pay out any kinds of royalties, and that it can therefore help its bottom line. And so there is this, let's say, race to the bottom musically. And, we've seen parallel type things happening in terms of how we accept the fidelity of music, where the vast majority of younger generations are quite content with low bit depth MP3s, and nobody really cares anymore about high fidelity and pristine sound and that kind of quality. So there are parallels in precedents.
For sure, and honestly, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I think we didn't stop hiring wedding photographers because we all got iPhone cameras. And maybe more pertinently, we didn't stop appreciating great singers or listening to great singers just because auto-tune came out, right? So I think this question about ethics is crucial, and it's probably important to talk about, why we're even doing what we're doing. What auto-tune did was it allowed people to express themselves musically who could not sing. And why couldn't those people sing? Well, maybe they couldn't afford lessons. Maybe they didn't have all the access to the time and the resources necessary and the training, right, that we've been lucky enough to have received in our lifetimes to do. The reality of music is that it leaves out the vast majority of people who don't have access to those resources or just simply don't have time to create music. And I think that is related to the issue that you're talking about. If people don't understand music, if people aren't symphonies, right? I mean, I have great friends who play in symphonies, and every year there's less and less people going to a symphony simply because I think there's less and less people who are just equipped to appreciate it or really even understand, what's going on in the music that symphonies perform. And so I think, I'm not saying AI is going to fix everything. What I am saying is there's a reason why we're releasing our technology for free. And it's because we want to enable people to be able to create music. And when we build our technology, we test it on an iPhone and we test it on a $10 track phone that you can buy in different. There are countries where the smartphones, they get the internet and they get smartphones, and it's these phones cost $5, $10. Our technology works on those phones because we are thinking very globally. We are thinking broadly about this. My hope is that people graduate, honestly, from what they're doing on Boomy. We get this believe me, we get it all the time. We get, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I add this? And what we have to say is no, Boomy doesn't do that. Go download and learn how to, make a DAW. There's free, and cheap tools where you can go how to learn how to make music. You can download what Boomy does and put it in these other systems. So our hope, and I think, again, when it comes to the ethics of it, is to just increase the overall opportunity for people to create music in the same way that Autotune did, but maybe in a more advanced and maybe more extreme way. So that's the why, right? And that's.
So I just want to say one thing, because I know we don't have a platform represented on the panel. So the idea that someone is using AI-created music to save money on royalties may or may not be true, but I don't know if from a copyright perspective, it may not be fundamentally different from, example, an ad agency that is using in-house musicians instead of commissioning something, right? So I wanted to say that, and I also wanted to give this panel, which I think has been really interesting, opportunity to give some last thoughts. I think the next panel is about AI ethics, so we have sort of teed it up very well, but this is, anything else you'd like to share?
Who wants to go first? Shall I go first?
I was going to say, this is, technology threatens business as usual until it becomes business as usual, and it threatens music until musicians start to incorporate it. The drummers had a terrible thing happen to them in the early 80s, drum machines. Well, thank God, the smart drummers went ahead and got the drum machine, because at the gig you might want some of those sounds. And I think we're always going to adjust to it. What you said about AI not being there for the turmoil in the kitchen, where you could do the chords, but you can't do the words. There's just, I think AI, I looked at some AI recipes to see how language is used. Let me just read a recipe. Use 2 large bones, sliced chicken salmon. Think about that. 2 cups chicken stock or mayonnaise. 1,100 versus 3,200 calories. Cut the snow peas into 1/4-inch cubes. We're going to need humans for a long time.
I get requests like that all the time to do that with my music.
Okay, all right, guys.
Yeah, okay. I guess following on that thread of protecting, composers' earning capacity, I don't know that I have formed a really strong opinion about this, but I'd like to see, we can never reverse engineer, ultimately, how the AI has created its music, what music it ingested and what choices it's made based on which of those, large amount of training paradigms that it's been exposed to. So I'd like to see some kind of a blanket license type of model that is basically saying, well, at some point in its history, the AI has gained the knowledge and the musical acumen from the body of music that is out there, and therefore we will then pass a fractional amount back on to registered songwriters and composers. I would like to generate a pool, effectively, of money that can help during these transitional moments until we figure it out.
Anyone else?
I guess going back to one idea we had before, in the same way that we have a high-res music logo to promote high-resolution music, maybe we need a free trade organic music logo if it's actually composed or played by human beings. Then we at least know a real person's getting paid. I don't know.
Sure.
And gluten-free.
Yeah, and
Gluten-free,
All
yeah.
right.
So I can eat.
all of our music is gluten-free, by the way. We built that in. We built that in. I think I had 2 points. The first is that I feel like a crazy person sometimes. That what's happening on Boomy is it's just people making music, and I actually don't think it's not as different as it is new. Both in terms of maybe the user experience is new, but the underlying concepts, we only get to do it because of the digitization of music over the last 20, 30, 40 years that's been happening naturally. So this was always kind of a natural endpoint of where creation was going to go, and I think we have an obligation to see where else it goes. You can't turn the clock, back on some of this stuff. And the second point would be that we don't have a technology environment today in which tech companies, right, Silicon Valley companies like us can get away with stuff, right? There's so much scrutiny. People read our ULA, and we're constantly in communication with our users, with the industry, with all of the relevant stakeholders to make sure that this does happen in an ethical way, and that we are not just flooding the market with a bunch of crap. That in my view is not the right way to build this business. Transparency and sort of being upfront about these issues and being having a perspective of it isn't finished. We're building this, and we're going to build this along with these perspectives. I think is going to be, frankly, probably the difference between success and failure for us in the long run.
Okay, so I think that is a great point to wrap up on before we move to bias and ethics in AI. And on behalf of the Copyright Office and WIPO, thank you so much to the panelists for your participation.
Thank you, Reagan.